Okay, I want you to picture something for me. Close your eyes if you have to, unless you're driving. Please don't do that.
Okay, I'm with you.
Imagine a giant, a colossal figure, muscles rippling, standing tall. But when you look down at this giant's feet, you see something weird.
Weird how. What's going on with the feet?
Well, the left foot is planted deep in mud. I mean, like medieval mud. It's surrounded by peasants who are farming with wooden plows, living in huts that wouldn't look out of place in the year 1400.
Right, so completely archaic.
Totally. But the right foot is trying to step onto a high-speed, steel-plated locomotive that is just tearing down the tracks toward the 20th century.
That is a precarious position. The giant is basically doing the splits between two different eras.
Exactly. And the giant is wobbling badly. This is a circus act. This is the Russian Empire at the turn of the last century.
That's a fantastic, if slightly terrifying metaphor. It just perfectly captures the tension we are diving into today. You have a country that is physically massive. It covers 1/6 of the Earth's land surface.
Unbelievable.
But it's torn between two completely different worlds.
And that tension is what we're here to unpack. I've been reading through this stack of sources. We've got histories of the czars, economic reports, even diaries from revolutionaries. And it feels like watching a slow-motion train wreck. But specifically, we're looking at the wreck before the big wreck.
Right. Most people know about 1917. Lenin, the Bolsheviks, the end of the Romanovs. That's the famous one.
The main event.
But today we are talking about the dress rehearsal, the revolution of 1905.
The dress rehearsal where the stage caught fire, the actors started fighting the audience, and somehow the director of the Tsar managed to not get fired.
For a while, at least, he definitely got a very, very stern warning.
So here is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to figure out why the kettle finally boiled over in 1905. We're going to look at how the Tsar, Nicholas II, managed to survive when everything seemed lost. And the big question, why did the changes he made, which looked huge on paper, fail to save his dynasty in the long run?
It's a story about missed opportunities. It really is. It's about a regime that was offered a lifeline, grabbed it, and then immediately tried to cut it with a knife.
And to get there, we have to start with the ghost in the room. You can't understand Nicholas II without understanding the baggage he inherited.
No, you can't.
I'm talking about his grandfather, Alexander II.
Alexander II, ruling from 1855 to 1881. In the history books, he's got this golden title, the Tsar Liberator.
Which sounds amazing, like a superhero name.
It does. And in some ways, he earned it, largely. His defining moment was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861.
I was looking at the numbers in our source material, and they are just staggering. We are talking about 53 million people.
53 million.
That is 90% of the population.
It's hard for us to wrap our heads around that today. I mean, imagine if 90% of the people in your country were essentially property. They were souls owned by landowners.
Right.
They couldn't move, couldn't marry without permission. They could be bought and sold. It was slavery in all but name.
And Alexander II comes along and says, enough.
Yeah.
He had this famous quote, and it's so telling. He said, "It is better to abolish serfdom from above than to wait for that time when it starts to abolish itself from below."
That is the key insight. He wasn't a Democrat. He wasn't doing this because he suddenly developed a deep love for human rights.
No, not at all.
He was a pragmatist. He looked around and realized that Russia was falling behind. Serfdom was an anchor dragging the economy down. You can't have an industrial revolution if your entire workforce is legally tied to the land.
But, and there is always a but, in Russian history, reading the fine print of this emancipation, it feels like a scam.
It was a deeply flawed freedom, and this is so crucial to understanding why 1905 happened 40 years later. The peasants were legally free, yes, but they weren't just given the land they had been farming for generations.
Right, they had to buy it.
They had to buy it, but since they were serfs with zero savings, the government stepped in, the government paid the nobles for the land, and then turned to the peasants and said, okay, now you owe us.
The redemption payments.
Exactly, and these weren't, friendly, low-interest mortgages. These were crushing debts. They were set up to last for 49 years.
49 years.
With 6% interest.
So do the math with me here. You get freed in 1861. You are technically paying for your own freedom until, what, 1910?
That's right. So fast forward a generation or two. You're a peasant in the year 1900. You never knew serfdom personally, but you are still paying off your grandfather's freedom. You're angry, you're broke, and you feel like the whole system is completely rigged against you.
And it gets worse, doesn't it? Because of how the land was valued. It wasn't fair market value.
Not even close. The nobles obviously wanted the best deal, so the land was often appraised way above its actual value. In some areas, peasants paid 30% more than the land was worth. They were essentially forced to subsidize the nobility's lifestyle.
So instead of creating a class of happy, productive farmers, Alexander II basically created a class of resentful, indebted peasants.
And here's the irony. Nobody was happy. The peasants felt cheated, obviously, but the nobles were unhappy too.
How so? They got the cash.
They got a lump sum, but they lost their free labor force, they lost their authority. And a lot of them just didn't know how to manage money. They were used to living off the land and the serfs, so they blew the money and started going bankrupt too.
So the liberator ends up with a country full of people who are mad at him for different reasons.
Precisely.
And we know how that story ends.
It ends in blood. Despite these reforms, or maybe because the reforms didn't go far enough, revolutionary groups started popping up. The most famous was Narodnaya Volya, the People's Will.
And they hunted him. I mean, relentlessly.
They did. They made multiple attempts on his life. They blew up his train. They planted a bomb in the Winter Palace dining room that killed 11 people. And finally, in 1881, they got him. They threw a bomb at his carriage in St. Petersburg.
And this moment,
Yeah.
this is the trauma that defines the next two generations of Romanovs, isn't it?
It is the pivotal psychological scar. Because standing right there, watching his grandfather bleed to death, legs shattered, uniform torn to shreds, was the future Tsar, Alexander III, and his young son, the future Nicholas II.
Talk about a formative memory. You can't unsee that.
And it taught them a very specific and I think a very dangerous lesson. They didn't think, oh, our people are desperate, maybe we should have given them more rights. They thought, we gave them an inch and they took a mile. They murdered our grandfather. Reform is weakness.
So the pendulum swings hard.
It slams into the wall. Alexander III takes the throne, and he is a giant of a man, physically imposing, stubborn, and absolutely furious. He almost immediately issues the Manifesto of Unshakable Autocracy.
That sounds rigid.
It was a declaration of war on progress. He basically said, I am God's chosen ruler. My power is absolute. Anyone who questions me is questioning God. It was a complete rejection of his father's legacy.
So all that talk of constitutions or parliaments, which had been bubbling up,
Gone. He creates a police state. This is the birth of the modern Okhrana, the secret police. They start infiltrating universities, factories, political circles. Spies were everywhere.
and he didn't just go after the revolutionaries, he went after the culture itself, didn't he?
Russification. He believed in one czar, one church, one language. He tried to force the Russian language and the Orthodox religion on everyone in the empire, Poles, Finns, Jews, Ukrainians, everyone.
Which seems like a great way to make enemies in a multi-ethnic empire.
It was incredibly short-sighted. He took populations that might have been loyal or at least neutral and gave them a very concrete reason to hate the state.
But he also clamped down on the peasants again. I saw this term land captains in the sources. What were they?
Think of them as immense localized power trips. These were officials, usually from the nobility, appointed to oversee the peasants. They could override the local courts. They could throw a peasant in jail without a real trial. They could overturn elections in the local councils, the Zemstvos.
So it was Alexander III saying, you people clearly can't handle freedom, so I'm sending a babysitter with a whip.
That's a perfect way to put it. It was a reversal of the local autonomy his father had granted.
So this is the world Nicholas II grows up in. His dad is this terrifying, strong autocrat who keeps the lid on the boiling pot by just sitting on it.
Exactly. And Nicholas is raised by a tutor named Konstantin Pobedonostsev.
That is a name.
Pobedonostsev was the gray eminence behind the throne. He was a deeply conservative intellectual who just hated democracy. He called Parliament the great lie of our time. He taught Nicholas that any sharing of power was a sin and a weakness.
So when Alexander III dies in 1894 of kidney disease, surprisingly, young Nicholas takes over. And he is not his father.
He is the opposite in almost every way. He's slight, he's polite, he's a devoted family man, he's charming, but he has no political instinct.
None.
He famously wept when he became czar, saying, I am not prepared to be a czar. I never wanted to become one. I know nothing of the business of ruling.
That is heartbreaking and also completely terrifying if you were one of the millions of Russian citizens.
Right. You have a man who is terrified of the job, but who is also religiously convinced that he must be an absolute autocrat because his tutor and his dad told him so. It's a recipe for disaster.
And while Nicholas is trying to play the role of the autocrat, the world outside the palace is changing fast. We have to talk about the economy, because you can't be a great power with medieval farms.
This is where the tension becomes unsustainable. By the 1890s, Russia is lagging way behind Britain, France, and a newly unified Germany. If you want to have a modern army, you need steel, you need coal, you need railroads. You can't fight modern wars with hay and horses.
Enter Sergei Witt.
Sergei Witt, maybe the most competent man in the entire empire. He was the Minister of Finance, and he looked like a modern CEO dropped into a medieval court. He was all business.
He had a plan to drag Russia, kicking and screaming, into the 20th century.
A four-part plan, very structured. First, protectionism. He put up high taxes on imported goods to force Russians to buy Russian-made products. This protects the baby industries while they grow.
Standard practice. What's step 2?
Foreign investment. And to get that, he had to make Russia look stable. So he put the ruble on the gold standard.
Can you break that down? Why does the gold standard matter to, say, a banker in Paris?
Think of the gold standard like a verified checkmark on Twitter, back when that meant something. It told foreign investors, specifically the French, that the Russian currency was stable. It was backed by actual gold. If they lent Russia money, the ruble wouldn't just collapse next week. It built trust.
So the French start lending money.
Oh.
Billions of francs.
Massive amounts. And this funded step 3, infrastructure, railways, specifically the Trans-Siberian Railway, and heavy industry, steel mills, coal mines, oil fields.
Okay, but loans have to be paid back. And building railroads costs a fortune. Where is Witt getting the cash to pay the interest and fund all this?
That brings us to step 4, the squeeze.
This is the painful part.
This is the part that leads to revolution. Witt knew he couldn't tax the nobles. They had the political power to stop him. So he squeezed the peasants and the workers. He put heavy taxes on everyday essentials, salt, kerosene, alcohol. The state took a monopoly on vodka production, which became a huge revenue source.
So the government is basically getting the peasantry drunk and using the profits to build railroads?
Effectively, yes.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he suppressed wages for industrial workers. He needed Russian industry to be profitable so he could reinvest the profits. If you pay the workers too much, the profit margin disappears. And he squeezed the peasants by exporting grain, even when there were famines at home.
So on paper, Witt is a genius. The charts are going up and to the right. The economy is growing.
Oh, the stats are beautiful. Coal production doubled. Iron production skyrocketed. Russia became the 4th largest steel producer in the world. Witt looks at the Tsar and says, see, it's working.
But if you zoom in from the macro chart to the actual human beings living this,
it's a horror show. This industrialization created a brand new class of people in Russia, the urban proletariat. These are peasants who left their villages to work in the new factories in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
and what was life like for them?
Imagine the worst Dickensian nightmare you can, and then make it colder. They lived in overcrowded barracks attached to the factories. We're talking about families separated by just a hanging sheet. They slept in shifts. One person gets up, the next person lies down in the same warm spot on the lice-ridden mattress.
No sanitation, no privacy.
None. And working conditions. 11 to 12-hour days were standard. Dangerous machinery with no safety guards. If you got your hand crushed, you were fired. No insurance, no unions. Unions were illegal.
So Witt has built a modern industrial machine, but he's fueling it with human misery.
And he's concentrating that misery. In the villages, the peasants were spread out across a vast country. But in St. Petersburg and Moscow, you now have hundreds of thousands of angry, young, exploited men living right next to the seats of power. It's a powder keg.
And then the economy stumbles.
Yes. Around 1899, there's a global economic slump. Demand for Russian steel and oil drops. Factories start closing. So now, those miserable workers aren't just miserable, they're unemployed and starving.
So we have the kindling. A whole forest of dry kindling. Now we need the spark. Or actually, looking at the outline, it seems like we have a whole box of matches.
It wasn't one thing. That's the key to 1905. It was everything happening at once. Let's look at the countryside first. 1903 and 1904. The years of the red cockerel.
I love that phrase, in a dark way. The red cockerel. What does it mean?
It's a vivid image. It refers to arson. Peasants would sneak up to the landlord's manor house or barn at night and set it on fire. The flames leaking up looked like the red comb of a rooster crowing at dawn.
And this wasn't just a few isolated incidents.
No, it was a wave of rural violence. It was an expression of that deep, multi-generational anger we talked about. The redemption payments, the land hunger, they wanted the land. They felt the land belonged to those who worked it, not the guy playing cards in St. Petersburg.
Meanwhile, in the cities, the government does something that I still can't quite believe. They try to start their own unions.
This is one of those it seemed like a good idea at the time moments in history. The head of the Moscow secret police, a guy named Sergei Zubatov, had a theory.
Well,
He thought the workers are unhappy. If we don't lead them, the revolutionaries will. So let's create police-sponsored unions. They called it police socialism.
police socialism. What was the goal there?
The idea was that these unions would focus on non-political things like better canteen food or cleaner washrooms and steer the workers away from demanding democracy or overthrowing the czar.
Let me guess. It didn't work.
It backfired spectacularly. It did two things. One, it legitimized the idea of organizing. It taught the workers how to hold meetings, how to elect leaders, how to speak up as a collective.
So it was a training ground.
A free training ground sponsored by the police. And two, when the workers eventually started making real economic and political demands, the police had to shut them down, which just proved to everyone that the government was the enemy, not their friend.
But it gave rise to a very important figure, Father Gapon.
Father Gapon. He's a fascinating, tragic character. A charismatic Orthodox priest who genuinely seemed to care about the poor. He led the Assembly of St. Petersburg factory workers, which was one of these state-approved Zubatov unions.
He wasn't a revolutionary, right? At least not at first.
No, not at all. He was a monarchist. He believed in the naive monarch myth. This was the common belief among the poor that the Tsar is our little father. He is good. He loves us. He just doesn't know that his bad ministers and cruel landlords are mistreating us. If we could just tell him, he would fix it.
That belief is the glue holding the whole empire together.
It was the only thing holding it together. And 1905 is the year that belief dies. Violently.
But before we get to the streets of St. Petersburg, we have to look east. Because nothing exposes the rot and incompetence of a regime quite like a short, disastrous war.
The Russo-Japanese War of 1904.
Why did Russia even pick a fight with Japan? It seems so random.
Well, partly it was imperial competition over territory in Manchuria and Korea, but partly it was for political reasons at home. One of the Tsar's ministers, Plev, famously said, "To avert a revolution, we need a small, victorious war."
Famous last words.
Indeed. The racism was a huge factor here. The Russian elite looked at the Japanese and saw little yellow monkeys. That's the language they actually used in their reports. They thought, we are a great European power. We will crush them in weeks.
But they forgot about logistics and about the fact that Japan had modernized incredibly quickly.
They were fighting a war 4,000 miles away from their capital, connected by a single-track railway, the Trans-Siberian, that wasn't even fully finished. There was a gap at Lake Baikal where they had to ferry troops and supplies across the ice in winter.
That's insane. And the Japanese were not monkeys. They were a highly modernized, disciplined, and motivated military machine.
The result was one national humiliation after another. The Russian army was besieged and defeated at Port Arthur. Then they were routed at the massive Battle of Mukden. And then the ultimate disaster, the Battle of Tsushima.
This is the naval battle, right?
Russia sent its Baltic fleet, literally sailing halfway around the world from St. Petersburg to Japan to save the day. It took them 7 months to get there. They were harassed by the British, ran out of coal. It was a nightmare journey.
And when they finally arrived,
The brand new high-tech Japanese Navy under Admiral Togo sank them in practically an afternoon. 2/3 of the Russian fleet was at the bottom of the sea.
imagine the shock back in Russia. You've been told you're a military giant.
Yeah.
And you just got knocked out by a country you considered inferior.
It broke the spell. It proved the government was incompetent. It proved the Tsar's advisors were idiots. And it emboldened every single opposition group.
The liberals start moving. The Union of Liberation.
These are the lawyers, doctors, professors, the educated middle class. They started holding banquets.
Banquets, like
And
dinner
prayer.
parties for revolution.
Essentially, yes. Public political meetings were illegal, but private dinner parties weren't. So they held these massive banquets where the toasts were really political speeches. A toast to the health of a future Russian constitution, pass the caviar, and down with autocracy.
It sounds kind of funny, but it was a serious form of organizing.
It was. By the start of 1905, you have everyone angry for their own reasons. The peasants want land, the workers want rights, the middle class wants a constitution, and the military is humiliated.
And that brings us to January 1905. The spark. Bloody Sunday.
It started as a fairly standard strike at the Putilov Ironworks in St. Petersburg. A few workers got fired, but it snowballed. Father Gapon decided to do something radical, lead a massive, peaceful procession to the Winter Palace to present a petition directly to the Tsar.
And we need to be crystal clear about the vibe of this march. This wasn't a mob with pitchforks and torches.
No, it was a religious procession. They were carrying icons of saints. They were carrying huge portraits of the Tsar and Tsarina. They were singing God Save the Tsar. They brought their wives and children. People were dressed in their Sunday best.
They were coming to ask their little father for help.
They had a petition, and it was actually very respectful but desperate. It said, "We are treated not like humans, but like slaves. Do not refuse to help your people. Destroy the wall between yourself and your people."
And how did the Tsar answer?
Well, Nicholas wasn't actually at the palace. He had left for the countryside, which was a terrible look. But the local commanders panicked. As the columns of marchers approached the palace from different directions, the soldiers opened fire.
Into the crowd.
Into the crowd. Men, women, children. The snow turned red. Estimates vary, but hundreds were killed. Thousands were wounded.
And in that moment, the little father died. That myth was gone forever.
Gapon himself, who survived, screamed, "There is no God any longer. There is no Tsar." The myth was shattered. You don't petition a father who shoots his children, you fight him.
And that kicks off the year of chaos.
It really was chaos. We call it a revolution, but it wasn't one organized movement. It was everything exploding at once. It was a nationwide breakdown of authority.
Let's look at the different fires burning. First, the strikes.
It was relentless. Sympathy strikes for the victims of Bloody Sunday spread across the empire. Railways stopped. Post offices stopped. Lawyers refused to appear in court. Doctors refused to treat patients. It culminated in a massive general strike in October that paralyzed the entire country.
And the peasants, what were they doing?
The Red Cockerel went into overdrive. They weren't just burning barns anymore. They were seizing land, looting estates, sometimes killing landlords and their agents. It was a full-scale peasant war in the countryside.
And the scariest part for the Tsar, the military.
Mutinies. If the army flips, the game is over. There were hundreds of minor mutinies, but the most famous one is the battleship Potemkin in the Black Sea.
The story of the meat?
It's such a visceral detail. The sailors were given borscht made with meat that was crawling with maggots. The ship's doctor looked at it and basically said, "It's fine, just wash it off with brine."
That is revolting. I can't even imagine.
The sailors refused to eat it, the captain threatened to shoot the ringleaders, and the crew just snapped. They killed 7 of the 18 officers, threw them overboard, and raised the red flag.
But even more important than the mutinies, something new was being born in the cities. The Soviet.
This is a crucial evolution in revolutionary politics. Soviet just means council in Russian. But in 1905, it became a new, powerful form of grassroots government. The St. Petersburg Soviet was formed to coordinate the general strike. It was made up of elected delegates from the factories.
So while the Tsar's government is paralyzed and can't do anything,
The Soviet is actually running things. Yeah. If you wanted to send a telegram, you needed the Soviet's permission. If you wanted the trains to run, you asked the Soviet. A young revolutionary named Leon Trotsky, who became its vice chairman, famously said the Soviet was a workers' government in embryo.
so Nicholas is cornered, his country is paralyzed, his fleet is at the bottom of the ocean, his uncle has been assassinated by a revolutionary bomb. How on earth does he survive this?
He survives by doing 2 things very cleverly: buying off the moderates and then crushing the radicals. I call it the bait and switch.
Okay, let's talk about the bait first.
The October Manifesto. Witt, our genius economist who had been sidelined, goes to the Tsar and says, "Sire, you have 2 choices. A military dictatorship, which requires a lot of blood and might fail, or give them a constitution."
And Nicholas hates the idea of a constitution.
Hates it with a passion. It goes against his unshakable autocracy belief. He saw it as a surrender, but he has no choice. So on October 17th, he reluctantly signs a manifesto. It promises civil liberties, freedom of speech, assembly, conscience, and, the big one, a Duma,
A parliament.
an elected legislative assembly. And the manifesto promised that no law would pass without the Duma's approval.
This must have felt like a massive victory for the liberals, for the people holding the banquets.
They were ecstatic. The people celebrating in the streets, they thought they had won. They thought Russia had become England overnight. The Constitutional Democratic Party, the Cadets, was formed. They looked at the manifesto and said, "Okay, we can work with this. The revolution is over."
And that's the trick.
That is the trick. The liberals go home. They stop supporting the strikes. They want law and order now so they can start their shiny new parliament.
Which leaves the workers, the socialists, and the peasants isolated.
Exactly. The opposition coalition is broken. Now the Tsar can use the switch.
And that switch was brutal.
He brings the troops back from the Japanese front. They were peasant soldiers who were mostly loyal and just wanted to go home. And he unleashes the Black Hundreds.
Who were the Black Hundred?
They were proto-fascist paramilitary gangs, ultra-nationalist, ultra-orthodox, and secretly funded and encouraged by the police. They marched under banners of the Tsar and the church. Their job was to terrorize the enemies of Russia.
And that meant who?
It meant beating up students and intellectuals, but mostly it meant horrific pogroms against the Jews. They scapegoated the Jews for the revolution. In Odessa alone, over 800 were killed in days of violence, while the police just stood by and watched.
So the state uses terrorism to reassert control.
Yes. They arrested the leaders of the St. Petersburg Soviet. Trotsky went to prison. They sent punitive expeditions into the countryside to burn villages and execute peasants. By early 1906, the revolution was largely crushed.
But there's still that promise of the Duma. The Tsar promised a parliament. He can't just take it back, can he?
Well, he can neuter it. In April 1906, just before the first Duma is set to meet, Nicholas issues the fundamental laws.
This is the reading the terms and conditions moment that nobody read.
It was a cold shower for the liberals. The fundamental laws stated clearly, the Emperor of all the Russias possesses supreme sovereign power.
Wait a minute, I thought we had a parliament.
You do, but the Tsar retains control of the army. He controls foreign policy. He appoints and dismisses the ministers. And then the masterstroke, Article 87.
Explain Article 87. It sounds like a legal loophole.
It's the ultimate loophole. It said that when the Duma is not in session, the Tsar can issue emergency decrees that have the force of law.
So if the Duma won't pass your law,
You just send the Duma home for a holiday, pass the law yourself using Article 87, and when they come back, it's already done. It made a mockery of the whole system.
so how did the relationship between the Tsar and these Dumas actually go? I imagine it wasn't a happy marriage.
It was a disaster. The first Duma met in 1906. It was dominated by the cadets, the liberals. They were full of hope and immediately marched in and demanded universal suffrage, radical land reform, and amnesty for all political prisoners.
And Nicholas said,
He said, these demands are completely inadmissible. He dissolved the Duma after just 73 days. He basically locked the doors and told them to go home.
go home, you're fired.
The deputies were furious. About 200 of them traveled to Vyborg in Finland, which was safer, and issued the Vyborg Appeal. They told the Russian people, citizens, don't pay your taxes, don't serve in the army until the Duma is restored.
A noble effort. Did the people listen?
Not at all. Crickets. The revolutionary energy was spent. People were tired and scared. The signatories ended up getting arrested and banned from politics for life.
So enter the second Duma.
The government hoped the next election would be more conservative. But because many of the liberals had been disqualified, the voters swung even further left. The second Duma was full of social revolutionaries and Mensheviks. It was even more radical than the first.
We replaced the professors with the bomb throwers.
Exactly. Nicholas called it the Duma of National Anger. He dissolved that one after about 3 months, using a trumped-up charge that they were planning a coup.
So he's 0 for 2. What's his next move?
He decides he's done playing by the rules, even his own rigged rules. In June 1907, his prime minister, Pyotr Stolypin, illegally changes the election laws by emergency decree.
Doctoring the vote.
Massive gerrymandering. They weighted the votes so that the vote of one landowner was now worth the votes of hundreds of peasants or workers. It was a complete farce.
So they rigged it to ensure a conservative, compliant parliament.
And it worked. The third Duma and the fourth Duma were dominated by the wealthy. They were much more submissive. They were known as the Duma of lords and lackeys.
But even they eventually got sick of Nicholas, didn't they?
They did. Even the Tsar's biggest fans eventually realized he was incompetent, especially during the war. But for a while, from 1907 to 1914, it gave the illusion of stability.
We mentioned a name there, Stolypin. Pyotr Stolypin. We really need to focus on him for a minute. He seems like the only person in the entire government who actually had a plan.
Stolypin is one of the great what-ifs of Russian history. He was a big, imposing man, incredibly brave. He survived multiple assassination attempts. He was appointed prime minister in 1906, right in the middle of the chaos.
And he had a very clear two-part strategy.
Suppression first, and then, and only then, reform.
Let's talk about the suppression, because he got a very dark nickname out of it.
Stolypin's necktie, that was the slang for the hangman's noose.
Oof, that's bleak.
He set up field course-martial. If you were accused of terrorism, you were tried by military officers within 24 hours and executed immediately. No appeals. Over 2,000 people were executed this way. He ruthlessly crushed the remaining revolutionaries.
But he wasn't just a pitcher. He knew that hanging people doesn't solve the underlying economic problems. He wanted to solve the peasant problem.
He did. He understood that the old communal system, the Mir, was holding Russia back.
Let's explain the mirror a bit more. We touched on it, but why was it so bad for farming?
The Mir held the land collectively. Periodically, they would redistribute the strips of land among the families based on family size. So if I'm a peasant, why would I work hard to clear rocks or fertilize my strip of land? In 3 years, the Mir might take it away and give it to my lazy neighbor because he had another kid.
So it disincentivized improvement. It kept everyone equally poor.
Exactly. Stolypin wanted to break the Mir. He passed laws allowing peasants to leave the commune, consolidate their scattered strips into one private farm, and own it as their personal property.
He wanted to create a wager on the strong.
That was his famous phrase. He wanted to create a new class of prosperous conservative farmers, they were called kulaks, who would have a stake in the system. His logic was simple. If you own your land, you don't want a revolution. You want stability to protect your property.
It sounds like a solid plan. Create a rural middle class that would be a firewall against revolution.
It was a brilliant plan. Lenin was actually terrified of it. He wrote that if Stolypin succeeded, the Bolshevik Revolution would never happen. Stolypin famously said, "Give me 20 years of peace, either external or internal, and you will not recognize Russia."
But he didn't get 20 years.
He got 5.
What happened? Why did it fail?
Well, it was too little, too late, but he was also hated by everyone. He was hated by the left because he hanged revolutionaries. He was hated by the right, the conservative nobles at court, because his reforms threatened the traditional ways and they saw him as a threat to their power. And Nicholas himself didn't really like him because Stolypin was smarter and more competent than him.
And then the Opera House.
September 1911, Kiev Opera House. The Tsar is there in the royal box. Stolypin is in the front row. A young man walks up to him, a revolutionary named Bogrov, who is also a secret police informant, it's very murky, and shoots him twice in the chest.
With the Tsar watching.
With the Tsar watching. Stolypin stood up, unbuttoned his jacket to check the wound, made the sign of the cross toward the Tsar, and collapsed. He died a few days later.
Very dramatic.
And very symbolic. With Stolypin dead, the last real energy for reform in the government died. The government went back to sleep, content with its rigged Duma.
And this brings us to the final act, the period from 1911 to 1914. On the surface, things look okay.
In 1913, they celebrated the Romanov tercentenary 300 years of the dynasty. There were huge parades. Nicholas toured the country. He saw crowds cheering and thought, "See? My people love me." 1905 was just a blip, a misunderstanding.
But the rot was still there. The peasants were still land hungry, the workers were still miserable and going on strike again, the Duma was still powerless.
And then comes the ultimate stress test, a test the fragile, half-reformed system was completely unprepared for, World War I.
If 1905 was a dress rehearsal,
1914 was opening night, and the entire stage collapsed immediately.
the war exposed everything, didn't it? All the weaknesses that 1905 had pointed out.
It was brutal. The initial patriotic enthusiasm lasted about 6 months. Then came the defeats. The Battle of Tannenberg, 300,000 Russian casualties. The army was poorly led, poorly equipped. There are stories of soldiers being sent to the front without boots, sometimes without rifles, told to pick one up from a dead comrade.
And the home front crumbled.
The railways, which Witt had built, couldn't handle the strain of total war. They couldn't move troops to the front and food to the cities, so the cities started to starve. Inflation went through the roof. Bread prices went up 500%.
And politically, the Duma tried to help, right? This was their chance to prove their worth.
This is the real tragedy. The Duma, even the conservative Fourth Duma, formed the Progressive Bloc. They went to Nicholas in 1915 and basically begged him, "Let us form a government of public confidence. Let us help you manage the war effort. We have the expertise."
It was a chance to finally share the burden, to create a real national unity government.
And Nicholas rejected it out of hand. He saw it as a power grab, an attack on his autocracy. He preferred to listen to his wife, Empress Alexandra.
And her advisor, Rasputin.
The Mad Monk. By 1915, Nicholas made the single most fatal mistake of his reign. He went to the front to take personal command of the army.
Which meant he was now personally blamed for every single defeat.
And it meant he left the capital in the hands of Alexandra and Rasputin. We call this period ministerial leapfrog. Rasputin was practically appointing cabinet ministers based on who flattered him or his cronies. They cycled through 4 prime ministers in a year. The government lost all credibility and authority.
So by February 1917, you have the same ingredients as 1905, but on steroids.
Exactly. The peasants are angrier because the army has taken all their horses and sons. The workers are hungrier and more numerous. The soldiers are now armed, battle-hardened, and mutinous on a massive scale. And the elite, the generals and the Duma politicians, have lost all faith in the Tsar.
In 1905, the army stayed loyal enough to save him. In 1905, the liberals were bought off with a promise. In 1917.
Nobody was left to save him. When the women in Petrograd started bread riots and the soldiers were ordered to fire on them, this time they refused. They turned around and shot their officers. The whole structure that Nicholas had insisted on, the unshakable autocracy, was too brittle. It couldn't bend, so it just shattered.
It's amazing how 1905 really was the warning shot. It showed them exactly where the cracks were in the foundation.
It was a blueprint for disaster, it said. The peasants want land. The workers want dignity. The educated middle class wants a voice in government. Nicholas spent the next 12 years trying to wallpaper over those cracks instead of fixing them.
It really makes you think about the danger of half measures in politics.
That's the ultimate lesson. Nicholas wanted a modern industrial economy to build great guns, but he wanted a medieval political system. You can't have both. You can't invite the 20th century into your factory but ban it from your palace.
You can't educate people to run complex machines and then treat them like ignorant serfs.
Precisely. The two are fundamentally incompatible.
So to wrap this up, let's go back to that what if. You mentioned Stolypin needing 20 years. Do you think if Nicholas had actually embraced the 1905 reforms, if he had allowed the Duma to become a real partner, if he had let Stolypin finish his work, and maybe avoided the war, could the Romanovs have survived?
It's the great unanswerable question of Russian history. Some historians say yes, that Russia was on a path, however bumpy, toward a constitutional monarchy like Britain. The economy was growing, literacy was rising. Others say the hatred was too deep, the problems too structural, that the system was already rotten to the core.
What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is that the ghost of Alexander II's assassination and the lesson Nicholas learned from it, the absolute refusal to truly share power, doomed them. When you make peaceful evolution impossible, you make a violent revolution inevitable. He had his chance in 1905 to choose evolution, and he chose to pretend.
That is a heavy note to end on, but a very necessary one.
Indeed.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. It's a complex and dramatic story, but understanding 1905 makes 1917 makes so much more sense. It wasn't a sudden storm. It was a hurricane they saw coming for 12 years.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating and cautionary tale.
We'll catch you in the next deep dive. Keep looking beneath the surface.